Hello and welcome to the third and final part of Are You Ready for That Grant? And in the third segment, we'll look at what a grant really means for your people, systems, processes, and contractual obligations. This is important for beginners as well as those thinking about stepping up to the next level. So we're looking at implications. Implications of what a grant really means for your organization, people, systems, processes, and contractual obligations. Now, in my journeys, pardon the pun, I've come across a number of temptations, but these are three of the top temptations. One, when you write an application and you're looking for funding and you've got a project in mind, you're doing this independently of working with your vision and your mission. It just seems like a good idea at the time. The only problem with that is that you are distracting from your core purpose. And usually what you want to do is not your core purpose. It might be a need that's out there, but it's not necessarily your immediate need to address. Because whatever you're doing in your organization should be following a strategy, it should be following a plan. So it's tempting to jump onto the latest bandwagon of a grant, especially if it seems like it's easy money, without actually considering, is this part of what is going to build our organization and build our credibility in the next 2 or 3 years? And of course, linked with that, of course, is strategy. You're not being strategic. And if you're going to build your organization, build your community, build your business, you're looking at, well, we need to do this, and then we need to do this, and then we need to do this, but we are aiming for this goal. So whilst you are building a business case and your pitch in terms of what the funder wants, in this example, you need to be very clear that what you're going to achieve also fits with your organization at the strategic level. Not necessarily, oh, this would be a great thing to go for, and we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this. Because I can tell you, you do that a few times, and it's like a ship without a rudder. You're not steering, you're just drifting. And you're chasing yellow taxis. And this analogy came up a few years ago in a project with a partnership of different organizations. And we were talking about grants at the time, and they were saying it's so easy to chase every grant opportunity that comes along. And that taxi, which is the grant opportunity, may not be going in your direction. Well, it's going past the front door, but it's not going to the destination that you want to go to. That doesn't matter. You're just going to jump in any taxi that comes along, and then what you'll find is that you're going to be responsible for somebody else's money and going to be doing something which actually isn't what your organization is really about. And I've seen that time and time again. You think, oh, that couldn't happen, but yes, it does. Because once you get into the habit of being dependent, because what could happen is that you start to employ staff and they are actually temporary as long as the project's there. And then when the project starts to come to an end and the funding comes to an end, you look for more funding to fund these positions because you want these people to stay. So that's an example of not being strategic, because you're just there to keep people employed. And you're chasing every taxi that comes along just to keep somebody employed. That's just an example, but I've seen that so many times. There are implications of getting a grant for project management skills and responsibility, because somebody needs to take leadership. And if you're doing this for the first time, or you're doing this with partners, and you don't know the lay of the land, and you're just waiting for somebody to take the lead, and that lead person might not have the right skills. So before you even go out there, work out, if you were to get this funding, who would be the right person to make sure that you are doing what is required, and that you have the skills to manage people, that you're a good leader, good communicator, etc. So there are implications there for being able to manage. And if you start, scaling up and you've got multiple projects going on, that's when you're going to need even more sophisticated communication, project management skills. It could be somebody actually managing a few projects. I've done that myself, where you actually need those most advanced skills. So you might need them in the first place, and you sort of have to make that decision, who will take the lead. Or it could be, you're moving up and you're scaling up, and then you're going to need those more professional skills. Reporting and communication systems, definitely because you're accountable. It's a contract with another funding, with the funder. They want to be able to see that they're going to get regular reports. So how does that work from the bottom up, as well as top down? How are you going to communicate with each other? How are you going to communicate with project partners if you've got partners? So there's a lot there about, how you're going to communicate with others. So it's important that you think about, well, how are we going to do that? Who's the level of command? Do a flow chart of who's who in the project and who's who in the organisation. Keeping to plan, budgets and timelines, and again, those are project management skills, but how are you going to make sure that you are accountable, that you are keeping to those milestones, and make decisions about what happens if something's out of skew, so it goes a bit skew if. So maybe the time frames have dropped, or maybe you spent more budget, or maybe that you haven't spent enough budget. What happens if part of the process is behind, and that has implications for the rest of it. So you have to, again, think about, well, how are we going to manage this project? How do we know at what point we need to have this much spend, this much activity? So your planning needs to be well thought out before you even dive into this. Personnel, what skills? New personnel, who does that have implications for your organisation? And I'm going to show you an example in the next slide. And your ability to manage people. You're going from a small organisation or a volunteer organisation, and you suddenly have somebody who's in charge of the project and how they fit in with the others. So dynamics change. So there's quite a few implications here about keeping, being able to, how are you going to manage that project once you've got the funding? And there's no point in waiting till afterwards and you get the money, because you're going to have to hit the deck running. And sometimes it happens that you might actually put a plan in and it gets funded, and then the person who's got to unpack it and the team's got to run it, and you realise, hang on a minute, this plan is unmanageable. And I've been in that situation myself, where I've inherited, somebody applied for funding, it was actually multi-millions, and they applied for the funding, it looked good on paper, but they hadn't done the nitty-gritty about what it would look like, and it was just conceptual in many ways, and it came to us and we had to operationalise it, and I'm scratching my head and I'm going, it took us 6 weeks to figure it out, and even then we went back to the funder and arranged for the variation. Now then, I'm going to give you an example here of the implications if you're going to be scaling up. Implications of a grant if you're small, first time, as I mentioned, you start to introduce new skills, new processes, leadership, communication. When you're scaling up, this is a case study, this is something that happened, is I had a client where they had 2 part-time staff, very part-time staff. So you can imagine it was a small, cosy organisation. Everybody knew each other, quite informal, and they got things happening, but they weren't a massive player. And then we were working together, and we were getting started off with small $5,000 grants, and up to 20, then 30s, whatever. And then at one point, we ended up with $1 million over 2 grants. $1 million. How did we do that? We actually knew from previous experience of the kind of project that we were running that dependency on volunteers wasn't 100% going to guarantee that we would achieve that we wanted to achieve, or the client wanted to achieve. So we looked at, okay, so who else is going to be applying for the funding? And we realised there were some pretty professional organisations, and they would not be putting in budgets for volunteers to drive the programmes. So we actually applied as professionals, and that meant looking at employing staff. And this was a project that employed 8 staff members. And immediately, that had huge implications, because the organisation, it had implications for the board. So, the small, cosy, sort of social type atmosphere suddenly became, oh my goodness, we've got responsibilities here, because we're signing off here to this formal agreement. We're accountable. We've got to have policies and procedures. We've got to up our game with human resources. Our financial management, we've got to be able to account for this, and timeframes, and how we're going to spend the money in accordance with what we said we'd do. We had all the plans in place, but it was a change in thinking completely. The CEO, there was a change in CEO, because the person who was doing it at one point was more into how the organisation had been, and suddenly we needed a more professional, outward-looking, growth-oriented person who could also negotiate with the funding body. Systems, health and safety, grievance, discipline, all those kind of policies and procedures and systems, ways of doing things, all needed to change basically overnight. It had big implications for the culture of the organisation and the identity of the organisation. And so, it was a great opportunity for this organisation, but I would say, if this was going to be you, I would really, really think it out. And we did think it out, but even then, there were things that we missed. And finally, I've mentioned a few times that this is a formal agreement. When you draw in funding, first of all, you have to be a legal entity. You could be an auspice group, which means you might not be constituted in law as a formal entity, but if you work through what is a formal entity, they will take responsibility and accountability for the funding on your behalf. That's probably the one opportunity that you would, without having a formal structure, be able to access funding. But in the main, or even in that case, the funding agreement is always between legal entities. And thus, because it is legal at law, they have to be signed at the highest level of the organisation. So whoever is delegated by the board, committee management, directors, whoever, or a deed of delegation if it's down to the CEO or somebody at that level. But it has to be signed by somebody who has got the authority of the organisation. That's how formal it is. And the funding agreement clearly defines what is agreed between the parties. So you've basically, they put out this expression of interest, which is the grant criteria. You've put in your pitch, your submission, and then what they've done is accepted it and put forward this contract. And it clearly defines what's agreed between the parties and what you will do in exchange for the funding. As I said, the signature is accountable. The agreement includes a schedule of activity and timelines based on what you said in the application. And it may allow the funder to audit the fundee. They can come in and check your systems, check your records, check what you've been doing, as long as it's within the terms of the funding agreement. They can't look at things outside because that's not, their responsibility. They look at things within the terms of the funding agreement. The funding agreement also considers intellectual property. Who owns equipment? Look for specific requirements. It could be that you may need to buy some reporting software, which I know happens in the training space. Or there could be requirements to sign into online reporting systems, or even online systems for getting updates from the funder. Work out, is there cost involved to some of the, this is an example here of reporting, there might be something else. Have a look through the funding agreement to make sure there will be things in there about insurances and indemnity. So have a look to see what's required and what the cost is involved to your organisation. I know a small client who would have to purchase public liability insurance for $10 million at least, and they were so small that they couldn't afford that. So they had to take a risk. Could we get this grant or not? If we don't get this grant, then that public liability insurance is something, well, they would need to do it, but they were sort of right at that beginning. So it's a real sort of big risk and a big expense. But as I said, look through the contract to make sure that you've got the insurances that will cover you as they're required to have in order to cover them. And the organisation can be made to pay back funds if targets are not met. And what does this mean for you? I have seen in a worst case scenario, granted they were a large organisation so they could cover the costs, but I've seen situations where this cost nearly £500,000, this was £500,000 to rectify a problem for a grant that was only about £150,000. But for them, it was their reputation that was at stake. So that's just an extreme example of if you get it wrong. Normally, I would say things are not going to plan. Let the funder know as soon as possible, because they can make arrangements. They can make arrangements to vary the contract, or they can allocate the rest of the funds somewhere else if it's not going to work. But if you leave it too late, then you may be required to send back funds. And in some cases, those funds do not go back directly to the department if it's government from whence it started. So everybody loses out. So it's, the agreement is something, and there's usually, if you look at the guidelines and all the paperwork that's presented on the internet, when the requests for grant applications goes up there, there's almost always a sample agreement. And that gives you the opportunity to look through it to make sure that you are in a position to meet that agreement. So over these three segments, we've covered what grants are and how they fit into the big picture. And once you know this, it's easier to answer the criteria questions, because what you're saying is that we are helping you to achieve your outcome of this big picture vision. How to put together a business case before you start looking for a grant. Because by doing that, you can work out whether you've got the capacity and whether it's something that you should be doing, or whether it's something somebody else should be doing, or whether you should just pass. And then the third part was about what it means, consider what it means for your people, your systems, your processes, the contractual obligations against the agreement. This is important for beginners and those looking to scale up their grants profile. So if you're new to grants and want answers to the following, such as where to start looking, what next, are you eligible, do you need the funder's do you meet the objectives, outcomes and criteria, do you have enough time to apply, and things like, well, will another one come along if we miss this one? We've got a program called Grant Writing for Beginners. And this is what you'll learn. You'll learn where to start looking and how to build a calendar and plan for grants. You'll learn how to find out what the funder is looking for and to unpack the information and prepare for an awesome application. You'll learn how funders work and how this impacts on how you answer the questions. What research you need to do before you get started. You'll learn techniques for planning how you'll deliver the project and more accurately predict the time, money and resources needed for success in any projects you deliver, whether they're funded or not. You'll learn how to put in place strategies to prove how effective the project was, both for the funder and for your own organisation. And you'll learn tips and tricks to assist with putting together a winning application. So what's your investment? This is what we're asking. It's going to be a 6-week live program with me to identify and work through a real grant in the area of your choice. And each participant will be able to choose their own grant. It's going to require an online commitment of 1 to 1.5 hours a week with me, plus the time you put in for research and homework, which can be anything up to 3 hours. You're going to put in some investment here because you're going to be developing a strategy for grants for the next 2 years. And this is a group coaching program. So we expect you to take part actively. It's going to have weekly calls for which we would normally charge $497 per person. But if you register today for our next program, you will pay only $297. If you follow the program, we guarantee you will have the skills and confidence to apply for the grants that matter. This is a special opportunity to work with a grant writing expert. And I'm going to give you a 60-day guarantee. If you don't think you've got value, we'll just return your investment. So if you're looking for grant writing as a beginner, then I would go to bit.ly/GWFORB and book today. And details of the next course schedule will be sent on receipt. And it is only if you act straight away that we will be able to honour a $297 fee for this program. The program itself comes with checklists, templates and planning tools. So even the most pedantic learner can create their own method of grant preparation or simply just use our proven resources. As we said, it's held weekly. The program is unlike the half or 1-day workshop because you'll be able to practice each step of the grant writing process again step by step, and we'll have the opportunity to ask questions at the next catch-up. It's part of a suite of supports, including a mentoring program to support you through writing your first grants. The mentoring program is also a valuable resource if you are looking to scale up your grants program. And so going back, if you want to book a place on the Grant Writing for Beginners, you're going to bit.ly/GWFORB. So if you're looking for more, the beginners program may not be for you. You may be looking for a mentor or a done-for-you service. I'm happy to have a conversation. So my name is Pat Grosse. You can contact me on 9005 5889 within Australia, support at thecommunityentrepreneur.com, or schedule a call, again using the bit.ly link, and the ending there is TCE booking. And I'm quite happy and willing to talk to anybody, whether you're in Australia, the United States, United Kingdom, wherever. I'm happy to talk about grants because I see this as a universal service. Thank you for listening.